We blessed animals this morning, and our animal friends, our companions, our pets, even being a different species, teach us a lot about belonging to one another, how we bind ourselves to another in relationship, deeply, intimately, with a lot of love, through all the things that go right and all the things that go wrong. They teach us a lot about trust. If you've adopted a rescue animal, you may have had to go through a period of time where that animal had to learn to trust you, and you had to get to know the animal. If you've had an animal right from its birth, maybe grew up with you and learned to trust you intimately, right? We can learn a lot about belonging to each other, even from the animal companions in our life. As Unitarian Universalists, part of the essential core of our faith tradition, of our religion, is something about belonging to each other. We call it covenant. Covenant is about how we belong to each other in relationship, in religious community. It is what holds us together as a community, because we do not have a creed or a dogma to which one must assent. It is not about what we believe the same together, but about how we have promised to each other to relate to each other. We speak about our covenant here with these words: love is the spirit of this society, dwelling together in peace, seeking truth, helping one another, serving human needs, honoring the earth and all that is. This is our covenant. This is how we speak about belonging to each other. Because we are covenantal, not creedal, it is these promises that hold us together in a community. What we agree to practice in our relationships with each other, not what we agree to believe the same with one another. When I looked up this next resource, I was going to say, a few years ago, my colleague and friend Tom Belote wrote a great essay about covenant. Turns out it was 10 years ago now. I was like, oh my, I'm not going to tell you. But Tom, if you see this, we're old. But the essay was about an experience Tom had at a protest in Missouri, in Kansas City, when he was a minister out that way. And he went to protest what was going to be like a restrictive sex education law in the state, that he was there to try and support more open, scientific-based public sex education in the schools. And the word got out that a pastor was there, and that the pastor was on the side of the pro-sex ed in public schools. So he started to draw a small little crowd of people who needed to ask him a bunch of questions. And they wanted to understand what made him be here and be on the side of wanting sex ed in public schools. And he explained a little about Unitarian Universalism and that we're covenantal, not a creedal faith. But people didn't get it. They asked, well, what does your church believe about the Bible? And he said, that's a creedal question. We are a covenantal faith. And they asked him, what does your church believe about God? And he said, that's a creedal question. We are a covenantal faith, held together by how we agree to be in relationship to each other, not about what we believe together. And he said this went on for quite a while. It was very difficult for some of them to grasp. They were really being challenged to think in a new way. And then he says this in the essay, which I really agree with. He says, sometimes in our churches, we stress the fact that we are not a creedal church more than we stress the fact that we are a covenantal church. We emphasize the creeds we are asked not to recite rather than the covenants we are asked to share. We overemphasize the fact that we are not required to believe in something, and we underemphasize the fact of the covenantal dimensions of our shared faith preferring not to articulate the covenants of behavior and relationship we hold in common and share with each other. I agree, and I think we do this because covenants actually require things of us. You know, people show up in our Unitarian Universalist congregations and they don't want to be required to believe in anything. Well, that's the easy part, folks. But what we do ask you, what we require of you, is to be in covenant. And Unitarian Universalists often erroneously think that we can believe what we want because there isn't a creed. And because there's no creed, there's no demands made on us in order to be part of a Unitarian Universalist community. But there are demands made on us to be part of a Unitarian Universalist community. We are required, when we sign up in the book, to live in covenant with each other, according to that local congregation's covenant. Covenants, I would argue, require more of us than creeds do. Creeds are binary. You either believe this or that. You either say yes or no to this certain creed or belief. You're either in and believe exactly like us or out. Covenants are not binary. They are lateral, they form a web, they wrap us in all kinds of aspects of relationship, and they are about the promises we make to each other that go to the heart of how we will belong to each other, like wedding vows. There is a wonderful essay, I forget what year, but from the 1970s, by a Catholic priest about the difference between covenant and contract. And he was writing about Christian marriage, covenant or contract. But the rest of his article aside, how he explains covenant is wonderful. Covenants are not contracts. Contracts deal with things, he says. Covenants deal with people. Contracts engage the services of people. Covenants engage whole persons. Contracts are made for a stipulated period of time. Covenants are forever. Contracts can be broken with material loss to the contracting parties. Covenants cannot be broken. But if they are violated, they result in personal loss, broken hearts, and lack of trust. Contracts are secular affairs and belong to the marketplace. Covenants are sacred affairs and belong to the hearth, the temple, and the church. Contracts are best understood by lawyers, civil and ecclesiastical. Covenants are better appreciated by poets, artists, and theologians. Contracts are witnessed by the people with the state as guarantor. Covenants are witnessed by God with God as guarantor. And if you want to replace the community or our values or our relationship with God, however you want. But covenants go far beyond just the two people. They include everybody, and they have a lateral dimension as well as a vertical dimension as well as a horizontal dimension where we covenant in the face of and in honor to something that goes also beyond us, our deepest, highest values, who we really should be. That power of love. Remember, everything we do out of love here? Remember that? Contracts can be made by any child who knows the value of a penny. Covenants can only be entered into by adults who are mentally, emotionally, spiritually mature. That's heavy. We don't have a creed here. We got something heavier. It is covenant, not a lack of creed, that allows us to avoid fundamentalism. Fundamentalism is, fundamentally about having no disagreements. And any examination of any human relationship at any level will teach us that even in the most intimate of human relationships, there are disagreements. People don't always, even at the level of our most intimate relationships, always think, believe, act, and feel the same. Fundamentalism is about always having to think and believe and feel and act the same. Fundamentalism is when any deviance from what is prescribed as acceptable is forbidden, shunned, and punished. We tend to associate fundamentalism with the worst of its worst Christian practitioners. Biblical literalists who hold ideas actually antithetical to the teachings of the Christ they claim to worship. Right? But there are also Islamic fundamentalists, and Jewish fundamentalists, and Buddhist fundamentalists, and Hindu fundamentalists, pagan fundamentalists, and perhaps the type of fundamentalist most present in a Unitarian congregation, the atheist fundamentalist, who is so steeped in my way or the highway that even saying the word God, or Jesus, or church, or spirit, or soul stops their participation in the community dead in its tracks. That's fundamentalism, my friends. That's brokering no idea but yours as the only right way. That is what Unitarian Universalism was created to be against. The most foundational and essential aspect of our tradition is the importance of covenant, of relationship, of belonging to each other, even if we have disagreements about ultimate questions of meaning, spiritual practices, approaches, beliefs, or preferences, or lack thereof. When fundamentalists don't get their way, they tend to take their ball and go home. Not only are you wrong, you are evil, and I'm out of here. Covenant requires us, not asks, requires us to stay at the table even when we have disagreements and conflict and anger with one another. It is a sacred promise to stay engaged. My friends, that is so much more difficult than any creed you'll ever be asked to believe in. We promise to stay in a mature relationship, even when we screw it up. Covenant binds us together in belonging because it is vertical as well as horizontal. It connects us to each other and to the deepest values we hold in the core of our being. It's not only that we commit to belonging to each other, but to something greater than ourselves. The movement of liberal religion, the congregation's mission, even for some of us, God. Socialist and researcher Brene Brown, I always do a Brene Brown sermon every year, so this is it, says in her book, Braving the Wilderness, that belonging is more important than fitting in. Belonging, she says, requires vulnerability. And the greatest barrier to true belonging is fitting in. And fitting in does not require us to be vulnerable with each other. She says, as it turns out, men and women who have the deepest sense of true belonging are people who also have the courage to stand alone when called to do that. They are willing to maintain their integrity and risk disconnection in order to stand up for what they believe in. This is also called self-differentiation. I can be myself and know where I start and stop and you start and stop even when we disagree with each other. I don't always have to act, think, believe, or feel the same as you, in order to maintain my connection to you. She says that when we fit in as opposed to belong, we acclimate to the situation instead of standing for our authentic self. Fitting in is going along to get along, sharing a perspective, sharing an opinion. But belonging is about relationships and maintaining connections even through disagreement. Working out how we stay together despite our differences. When I say this to some people, what I'm about to say next, they get really surprised. But I want you to try and enter into this with me. I never fit in the Catholic Church I grew up in. But to this day, I still feel I belong there if I walk back in the door. Think about that for a second. I've joined Unitarian Universalist congregations. I've even become an ordained Unitarian Universalist preacher. But I will tell you, there are plenty of times where, as a layperson, and then now for years as a minister, I have not felt I belonged in the congregation I was in. I fit in. I had all the same political opinions. I had all the same views of evolution. I had all the same views of science and protecting the environment. I had all the same views about accepting people, whatever their sexuality or gender expression. But somehow, there was a barrier to belonging because of I used to be Catholic, or I still like God, or whatever it was. I have a feeling that we lose sight of belonging and covenant because so many of us come to Unitarian Universalism from places where we do not and did not fit in theologically, socially, culturally, or politically. And we need to find people with whom we fit in as well as belong. That's very true. But this is a vastly different thing than covenant and belonging to others. And why, even though covenant is central to how we practice our religion, that so many Unitarian Universalists, and even some of our congregations, do not emphasize covenant enough. Because covenant throws up requirements. And they're hard, difficult to practice requirements. But boy, if we make it central to practice them, I guarantee you that community is going to be seen as vibrant and grow. Because those are the people that walk the talk. Covenant is how we are religious. And we are religious because from its root in Latin, it means to bind together or bind back. We are bound in relationship to each other and our principles and our values. Some religions bind people together through beliefs and creeds. We do it through relationships. And that relationship, that covenant, allows all of us to do more and be more than we ever can on our own. I am deeply grateful to Ann and the choir for attempting a really difficult piece of music I want you to hear today called One Voice. So I want to tell you about it, because we couldn't quite get it yet. But in her beautiful song, One Voice, a woman named Ruth Moody, who's a member of a group called the Waylon Jennies, cute, isn't it? The Waylon Jennies, writes about this idea of how we're in relationship to each other and how we belong to each other. And she does it through not only the words of the song, but the arrangement of the song. The first verse is about, this is the sound of one voice, one spirit, one voice, the sound of one who makes a choice. And it's a single singer. Then the second voice comes in. This is the sound of voices too. The sound of me singing with you, helping each other to make it through. Then the third voice enters. This is the sound of voices three, singing together in harmony, surrendering to the mystery. Then this is the sound of all of us, right? All of us together. seeking the will to trust each other. Then she goes back to one voice, but this time the choir is still singing. This is the sound of one voice also, the sound of all of us. And she loses the rhymes because in that kind of perfect belonging, we don't always rhyme, but we have one voice. It's a really great composition. And ultimately, this is why we covenant, to, as different as we are, sing with one voice that which is deepest in our heart, those things we value above all: love, connection, help, peace, fairness, justice, equity, having enough. Belonging itself is at the heart of the battle for the soul of our country right now. Our entire national history has been an ongoing struggle to expand we the people to include everyone in we. Systemic racism and white supremacy keep people of color not only from fitting in, but from belonging. Patriarchy keeps women from not only fitting in, but from belonging. Xenophobia keeps refugees and immigrants and others not only from fitting in, but from belonging. Homophobia keeps the LGBT community not only from fitting in, but from belonging. The first and most important thing for tyrants and despots to do to maintain and get power is to divide the people into us and them, in or out, black or white, straight or gay, native or foreigner. That's not one voice. In a very real sense, our nation is fighting right now over whether or not we want to have an ongoing covenant with each other, we the people. We all need to feel wanted, accepted, appreciated, and loved. That does not come with fitting in. That comes with belonging. We are social creatures, and belonging is an essential human need. Our Unitarian Universalist first principle, the inherent dignity and worth of every person, and the concept of covenant on which we base our faith, are essentially about belonging and how we belong to each other. Covenant is the way members of a congregation agree to be in community together, and thus statements of how we belong to each other. The UUA principles are actually the statements of covenant the congregations of the association make to each other to be in relationship of belonging to one another. The first principle about the inherent dignity and worth of every person is a theological statement that all of us should belong to all of us together. We are to treat everyone as though they already belong. And this is perhaps the most lofty aspiration of our Universalist faith. Everyone belongs. Everyone is holy. There is no us and them. There is only we. Our great calling is to create that beloved community where we all belong, so that we may sing of our most lofty ideals with one voice.